Behave. The Biology of Humans at Our Best and Worst, by Robert M. Sapolsky. Introduction. Imagine this for a moment. You fought your way into Adolf Hitler's secret bunker. The guards are neutralized. You burst through the final door, machine gun ready. He lunges for his pistol, but you're faster. You knock it from his hand. He reaches for a cyanide pill, and you knock that away too. He's trapped. You, alone, have captured the most evil man in history. And this is where the fantasy gets dark. What would you do to him? What does he deserve? Neuroscientist Robert Sapolsky, in his masterwork Behave, confesses to having this fantasy since he was a kid. His heart rate quickens just thinking about it. He imagines the most elaborate, agonizing punishments possible. To keep Hitler alive, paralyzed but able to feel, and to inflict upon him an eternity of suffering in every single moment. But then, Sapolsky hits a wall. A big one. As a scientist, he doesn't believe in evil. He doesn't believe in souls. He doesn't even really believe that punishment has a meaningful place in our justice system. And yet, he still feels it. He feels the raw, visceral need for vengeance. This contradiction is the heart of his incredible book, Behave. It's a book that has sold hundreds of thousands of copies and has been hailed as a modern classic, precisely because it tackles the single greatest puzzle of our species. Why do we behave the way we do? Why are we, the same species, capable of both breathtaking acts of kindness and horrifying acts of brutality? We are the species that saves a stranger's life and the species that commits genocide. We are the primates who practice empathy and the primates who wage war. How can both of these realities exist within us? Robert Sapolsky, a professor of biology and neurology at Stanford University and a recipient of the MacArthur Foundation's Genius Grant, has spent his life trying to answer this question. He's part neurobiologist, studying the intricate wiring of the brain, and part primatologist, spending his summers living with wild baboons in Africa. This unique perspective allows him to see the deep, biological currents that shape our actions. And today, I want to take you on a journey through his most profound insights. By the end of our time together, you will understand the hidden forces that shape your decisions, from the hormones surging through your body to the culture you were raised in, all the way back to the evolutionary history of our species. We're going to peel back the layers of human behavior, one by one, to uncover why we do the things we do, at our best, and at our worst. This isn't just a summary, it's a map to understanding yourself and the complex, beautiful, and sometimes terrifying world of human nature. Book summary. So, let's start with a single behavior. It could be anything. You pull a trigger. You touch the arm of a suffering person. You tell a lie to protect someone's feelings. You betray a friend. A single act, in a single second. Sapolsky asks a simple but profound question. Why did that just happen? To answer this, he proposes we work backward in time. We're going to start 1 second before the behavior and then zoom out, further and further, from minutes, to hours, to years, to centuries, until we're looking at millions of years of evolution. It's like being a detective at the scene of a crime, but the crime is the mystery of human action itself. Let's begin. 1 second before. 1 second before you acted, what was happening? It all comes down to the brain. Your neurons were firing, sending electrical signals that commanded your muscles to move. The brain is the final common pathway, the place where all the influences we're about to discuss converge into a single action. To make sense of this incredibly complex organ, Sapolsky uses a simple, 3-layer model. Imagine first an ancient, reptilian brain at the very core. This is layer 1. It's the brainstem, the part that handles all the automatic stuff, your breathing, your heart rate, your body temperature. It's the brain's engine room, working quietly in the background. Now, wrapped around that is layer 2, the limbic system. This is the seat of your emotions. Fear, aggression, pleasure, arousal, it all starts here. This part of the brain is what makes you shiver with fear during a scary movie, even though you know it's not real. The limbic system takes in the world and decides how you feel about it. At the center of this emotional world is a small, almond-shaped structure called the amygdala. The amygdala is your brain's alarm bell. It's constantly scanning for threats. And here's the crucial insight: the amygdala is central to both fear and aggression. They are deeply, biologically intertwined. A threat appears, the amygdala fires up, and you get ready for fight or flight. It's the part of the brain that makes a cornered animal lash out. Sapolsky shares the chilling story of Charles Whitman, the Texas Tower sniper. In 1966, Whitman, a seemingly normal engineering student and Eagle Scout, climbed a tower at the University of Texas and opened fire, killing 16 people after having murdered his wife and mother. In his suicide note, he asked for an autopsy of his brain, saying he couldn't understand his own violent impulses. The autopsy revealed a tumor pressing directly on his amygdala. His brain's fear and aggression circuit was being hijacked. This doesn't mean a tumor caused his actions. He also had a history of being abused by his father. Biology is never that simple. But it shows how a malfunctioning amygdala can pour gasoline on the fire of pre-existing tendencies. It's your brain's panic button. Finally, on top of everything, we have layer 3, the neocortex. This is the newest, most evolved part of the brain, and in humans, it's enormous. This is where rational thought, planning, and self-control happen. It's the part of you that thinks, reasons, and makes conscious decisions. And the most important part of this layer is the frontal cortex, right behind your forehead. The frontal cortex is the CEO of your brain. Sapolsky's simple, brilliant definition for its job is this: the frontal cortex makes you do the harder thing when it's the right thing to do. It's the voice in your head that says, "Don't eat that second piece of cake," or "You should probably study for your exam instead of watching another episode," or "Maybe don't send that angry text." It's the part that reins in the impulsive, emotional commands of the limbic system. Think of the famous case of Phineas Gage, the 19th century railroad foreman who had an iron rod blown through his frontal cortex. He survived, but his personality completely changed. The once responsible, well-liked man became impulsive, profane, and unreliable. His friends said he was no longer Gage. His brain's CEO had been fired, and the emotional, impulsive parts of him were now running the show. So, in that 1 second before a behavior, you have a constant conversation, a battle even, between the emotional, reactive limbic system, especially the amygdala, and the thoughtful, rational frontal cortex. But there's a third player, the dopamine system. You've probably heard of dopamine as the pleasure chemical, but Sapolsky reveals it's far more interesting than that. Dopamine isn't really about the pleasure of getting a reward. It's about the pleasure of anticipating it. It's the thrill of the hunt, not the feast. It's the feeling you get when you're about to achieve something, the motivation that drives you to work towards a goal. Here's the fascinating part: dopamine release is supercharged by uncertainty. A reward that you get 100% of the time is nice. But a reward that you might get, one that comes only 50% of the time, that maybe sends your dopamine levels through the roof. This is the neurological engine behind gambling addictions and why we can get hooked on checking our phones for notifications. The pleasure is in the possibility. So, in that final second, your brain is a whirlwind. The amygdala is shouting about potential threats. The frontal cortex is trying to make a rational, long-term decision. And the dopamine system is whispering about the delicious anticipation of a potential reward. The behavior you choose is the winner of that internal negotiation. seconds to minutes before. But what triggered that whole brain conversation in the first place? For that, we zoom out to the seconds and minutes before the act. This is the world of sensory cues, the sights, sounds, and smells that your brain was processing. And much of this happens unconsciously, beneath your awareness. These are what scientists call subliminal primes. Sapolsky highlights some deeply unsettling research. Put a white person in a brain scanner and flash a picture of a black face for just a fraction of a second, too fast to be consciously perceived. What happens? The amygdala, the fear and aggression center, lights up. The brain automatically categorizes us versus them with terrifying speed. Now, if you show the face for a longer time, something else happens. First, the amygdala activates, but then the frontal cortex kicks in and quiets it down. It's the brain CEO stepping in to say, "Hold on, let's think about this." Let's not jump to prejudiced conclusions. But that initial, gut-level reaction is there, a remnant of our tribal evolutionary past. This automatic bias has tragic real-world consequences. Sapolsky brings up the shooting of Amadou Diallo, an unarmed West African immigrant who was shot 41 times by police in New York. He was reaching for his wallet, but in a split second, the officer's brains processed black man reaching for something as threat and perceived a gun where there was none. Their amygdalas reacted faster than their frontal cortices could catch up. It's not just race. We're primed by everything. If you hold a warm cup of coffee, you're more likely to judge a stranger as having a warm personality. If you sit in a hard chair, you're more likely to be a hard negotiator. If there's a foul smell in the room, you're more likely to make harsher moral judgments. Our brains struggle to separate literal sensations from metaphorical concepts. A dirty act feels literally dirty, which is why, in one study, people who were asked to recall an immoral act they'd committed were more likely to choose a gift of antiseptic wipes over a pencil afterward. It's called the Macbeth effect, the unconscious desire to wash away our sins. Even your internal state matters. A famous study of parole judges in Israel found a shocking pattern. Prisoners who appeared before the judges early in the morning, or right after a lunch break, were granted parole about 65% of the time. But as the hours passed and the judges got hungry and tired, the parole rate dropped to nearly zero. The judges weren't consciously deciding to be harsher. Their brains, depleted of glucose, were simply taking the easier, default path, saying no. Justice, it seems, depends on a well-timed snack. These are the hidden forces at play just moments before we act. We are far less rational and in control than we like to think. Hours to days before. Zooming out further, what was happening in the hours and days leading up to the behavior? Here, we enter the world of hormones. Hormones are chemical messengers that travel through the bloodstream, slowly altering the sensitivity of your brain. They don't cause behaviors, they change the volume. They make your brain more or less likely to respond to a trigger in a certain way. Let's talk about the most famous one, testosterone. The stereotype is that testosterone equals aggression. More testosterone, more aggression. Simple. But Sapolsky masterfully debunks this myth. It's one of the most important lessons in the book. Testosterone doesn't create aggression. It amplifies the aggression that's already there. Imagine the amygdala is a gas pedal for aggression. Testosterone doesn't press the pedal, it makes the pedal more sensitive. The real job of testosterone isn't about aggression at all. It's about status. When an animal's status is challenged, testosterone rises. And what does the animal do? It does whatever it needs to do to maintain its status in that particular social context. If you're a baboon, maintaining status usually involves being aggressive. So, a rise in testosterone makes you more aggressive. But what about humans? In a brilliant experiment, men were given a dose of testosterone and then asked to play a bargaining game called the ultimatum game. In this game, you can build a reputation for either being fair or being a jerk. The stunning result? The men with extra testosterone became more generous, not less. Why? Because in that social context, being fair was the way to gain status. Testosterone didn't make them aggressive, it made them do whatever was needed to look good and rise in the ranks. As Sapolsky puts it, the problem isn't that testosterone can increase aggression. The problem is how frequently we, as a society, reward aggression with status. Now, let's look at the other side of the coin: oxytocin. This is often called the cuddle hormone or the love hormone. It's released during bonding, between mothers and babies, and between romantic partners. It promotes trust, generosity, and empathy. Sounds wonderful, right? But oxytocin has a dark side. It doesn't make us love everyone. It makes us love us, and it makes us less cooperative, less trusting, and more hostile toward them. It's a hormone for parochialism, not universal love. In studies, giving people oxytocin makes them more likely to favor their own group and even to preemptively attack an outgroup in a competitive game. It draws the line between us and them in thick, hormonal ink. Finally, there are the stress hormones, like cortisol. What does stress do to your brain? In the short term, during an emergency, it's a lifesaver. It sharpens your focus and mobilizes energy. But when stress is chronic, lasting for hours, days, or weeks, it's disastrous for decision-making. Chronic stress does two things. 1. It sends your amygdala into overdrive, making you more anxious, fearful, and aggressive. 2. It weakens your frontal cortex. The CEO of your brain gets tired and overwhelmed. The result? Under stress, we become more impulsive. We make worse decisions. We fall back on old habits, even if they're bad ones. We become less empathetic and more self-centered. A stressed brain is a more primitive brain, one where the emotional, reactive parts are in charge. Days to months before. If we zoom out even further, to the scale of days and months, we see something truly remarkable. The brain physically changes. This is the concept of neuroplasticity. Your brain is not a fixed, static machine. It is constantly rewiring itself in response to your experiences. When you learn something new, the connections between your neurons, the synapses, get stronger. This is a process called long-term potentiation, or LTP. It's like paving a dirt path in your brain, turning it into a highway. The more you use a neural pathway, the more efficient it becomes. But the brain can also weaken connections through a process called long-term depression limited. It prunes away the pathways you don't use. This remodeling is happening all the time. The most famous example is a study of London taxi drivers. To get a license, they have to memorize the knowledge, a labyrinth of 25,000 streets and thousands of landmarks. It's an incredible feat of spatial memory. And what did brain scans show? The part of their brain responsible for spatial memory, the hippocampus, was physically larger than in non-taxi drivers. And the longer they'd been on the job, the bigger it was. Their brains had physically adapted to the demands of their lives. But this plasticity cuts both ways. Chronic stress doesn't just make the frontal cortex work less well, it can cause it to physically shrink. The dendritic branches that neurons use to communicate retract. Meanwhile, the amygdala does the opposite. It grows larger and more densely connected, becoming even more reactive to threats. This is the biological scar of trauma. It's why experiences from months ago can still be shaping your reactions today. But it's also a profound source of hope. If the brain can change for the worse, it can also change for the better. The lesson of neuroplasticity is that change is always possible. Adolescence. Now, let's take a special detour into one of the most tumultuous periods of life, adolescence. Sapolsky puts it perfectly: the story of the teenage brain is the story of a frontal cortex that is not yet finished. Imagine a car with a powerful, souped-up engine but faulty brakes. That's the adolescent brain. The emotional, impulsive, reward-seeking parts of the brain, the limbic system and the dopamine system, are fully developed and running on high octane. This is why emotions feel so intense, why social acceptance feels like a matter of life and death, and why novelty and risk are so thrilling. An adolescent's dopamine system goes haywire for big rewards but finds small, sensible rewards boring, even aversive. But the brakes, the rational, forward-thinking frontal cortex, are still under construction. The brain is undergoing a massive pruning process, getting rid of inefficient connections, and it's also adding myelin, the insulation that helps signals travel faster. This process isn't complete until your mid-20s. This gap, a mature emotional system and an immature rational system, explains almost everything about being a teenager. The risk-taking, the impulsivity, the heightened sensitivity to peer pressure. In an experiment, adolescents and adults played a simulated driving game. When they played alone, they took a similar number of risks. But when two of their friends were in the room watching, the adults' behavior didn't change. The adolescents? They took 3 times as many risks. The presence of peers amplifies the brain's reward circuitry, making the thrill of showing off irresistible to a brain with weak brakes. This is also the time of life when we are most likely to kill or be killed, to commit a crime, or to change the world. It's a period of maximal risk and maximal opportunity, all because the frontal cortex hasn't caught up with the rest of the brain. Sapolsky argues this delay is actually an evolutionary advantage. It makes the frontal cortex, the part of us that is most us, less constrained by genes and more sculpted by experience and culture. It's the brain's way of ensuring we are adaptable. Childhood and the womb. Zooming out even further, we arrive at childhood and fetal life. The environment you grew up in didn't just teach you things, it physically built your brain. We now know that the environment begins in the womb. A fetus can hear, taste, and even learn. Newborns prefer the sound of their mother's voice and even the rhythm of stories she read aloud during the last trimester. More profoundly, the hormones a fetus is exposed to have lifelong organizational effects. Prenatal testosterone exposure, for example, helps masculinize the brain, influencing everything from playstyle in childhood to aggression later in life. But the most powerful environmental influence is stress. A mother's stress becomes the fetus's stress. High levels of maternal stress hormones can cross the placenta and alter the construction of the fetal brain, creating an adult who is more prone to anxiety and depression. After birth, the importance of a mother's presence is paramount. We all know this intuitively, but for a long time, psychology didn't. Sapolsky recounts the devastating history of Harry Harlow's experiments with baby monkeys in the 1950s. At the time, the prevailing wisdom was that babies only bond with their mothers for food. Harlow built 2 surrogate mothers, one made of cold wire with a milk bottle, and another wrapped in soft terry cloth with no milk. The baby monkeys overwhelmingly chose the soft, comforting cloth mother, clinging to it for security, only dashing to the wire mother for a quick meal. Harlow proved that what infants need is not just calories, but comfort, contact, and love. Childhood adversity, from poverty to abuse to neglect, leaves deep biological scars. It elevates stress hormone levels, impairs the development of the hippocampus affecting learning and memory, and, most critically, stunts the growth of the frontal cortex. By age 5, children from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, on average, have a thinner frontal cortex and poorer executive function. They are starting life's race from behind, with their brains already reflecting the chronic stress of their environment. This isn't a psychological issue, it's a neurobiological one. Centuries to millennia before. But even our childhood is shaped by deeper forces. For this, we must zoom out to the scale of centuries and millennia, to the level of culture. Culture, Sapolsky shows, isn't just a set of beliefs or customs. It literally shapes how our brains are wired and how we perceive the world. He focuses on one of the most studied cultural divides: individualist versus collectivist cultures. Individualist cultures, like the United States, value independence, personal achievement, and uniqueness. Collectivist cultures, like many in East Asia, value harmony, interdependence, and the needs of the group. This isn't just a difference in philosophy, it changes how you think. Show someone from an individualist culture a picture of a school of fish with one fish out in front, and they'll say it's the leader. Show the same picture to someone from a collectivist culture, and they'll say that fish has been cast out from the group. In experiments, when asked to draw their social network, Americans tend to draw themselves as the largest circle in the center. East Asians draw themselves as a smaller circle, off to the side. Where do these differences come from? Sapolsky points to ecology. The collectivism of East Asia, for example, has its roots in millennia of rice farming. Growing rice requires massive, coordinated, communal labor, building irrigation systems, planting, and harvesting together. This fosters a culture of interdependence. In contrast, the rugged individualism of America comes from its history as a nation of immigrants, people who were restless and non-conforming enough to leave their homes, and a moving frontier that rewarded self-reliance. Culture is the water we swim in, so pervasive we don't even notice it. But it shapes our deepest assumptions about right and wrong, us and them. Millions of years ago, evolution. Finally, we arrive at the ultimate cause, evolution. Why do our brains work this way at all? For this, Sapolsky lays out the 3 pillars of behavioral evolution. 1. Individual selection. The idea that you behave in ways that maximize the number of copies of your own genes passed to the next generation. This explains competition and selfishness. The most brutal example is competitive infanticide, seen in species like langur monkeys. When a new male takes over a group, he will often kill the infants of the previous male. It's horrific, but it makes cold, evolutionary sense. It brings the females back into estrus so he can father his own offspring. This is not behavior for the good of the species, it's for the good of his selfish genes. 2. Kin selection. You share genes with your relatives. 50% with a sibling, 25% with a half-sibling, 12.5% with a cousin. So, from a gene's eye view, helping your relatives reproduce is another way of passing on your own genes. The geneticist J.B.S. Haldane famously quipped, "I would lay down my life for 2 brothers or 8 cousins." This explains nepotism, family loyalty, and why we feel a special obligation to our kin. 3. Reciprocal altruism. This explains cooperation between non-relatives. I'll scratch your back if you scratch mine. This can work, but it's always vulnerable to cheating. The most famous strategy for maintaining cooperation is tit for tat. You start by cooperating, and after that, you do whatever the other player did on the last move. It's nice, but it's not a pushover. It's retaliatory, but also forgiving. Humans are a messy mix of all these strategies. We are not a classic monogamous, pair-bonding species, nor are we a hyper-competitive tournament species like baboons. We are, as Sapolsky says, profoundly confused. We are mildly polygynous, capable of both deep love and casual infidelity. Our social lives are a tangled web of individual ambition, family loyalty, and complex cooperation with strangers. The beauty of Sapolsky's framework is that it shows how these ancient evolutionary pressures are still at work within us, interacting with our culture, our childhood, our hormones, and our neurons to produce the behavior we see in that single, critical second. Commentary. So, after this epic journey through time, from a single neuron firing to millions of years of evolution, what's the big takeaway from Behave? If I had to distill Robert Sapolsky's entire message into one phrase, it would be this: it's complicated. And that, paradoxically, is the most hopeful message of all. If behavior were simple, if there were a single gene for aggression or a single bad part of the brain, then we might be locked into our fates. But it's not. There is no single cause for any behavior. Everything is a product of the bubbling, interacting stew of everything that came before. Biology is not destiny. It is context. The most powerful lesson I take from this book is one of humility. It challenges the very notion of free will. When you understand the sheer number of hidden forces shaping your actions, the subliminal cues, the hormonal tides, the echoes of your childhood, the deep evolutionary programming, it becomes much harder to pat yourself on the back for your good deeds, and much harder to condemn others for their bad ones. Sapolsky himself argues that a truly scientific understanding of behavior should lead us to abandon the concept of blame altogether. This doesn't mean we let dangerous people roam free. A car with faulty brakes needs to be taken off the road, not because it's evil, but because it's dangerous. We can protect society without resorting to moralistic condemnation. He challenges us to see people not as good or evil, but as the end product of a biological and environmental lottery over which they had no control. This is a radical and profoundly humane idea. So, what can you do with this knowledge? First, practice self-awareness with compassion. The next time you feel an intense emotion, anger, envy, prejudice, don't just act on it. Ask, am I tired? Am I hungry? Am I stressed? What just happened in the last few minutes that might be priming me to feel this way? Understanding the biological machinery doesn't excuse your behavior, but it can give you the space to choose a better response. Second, change the context to change the behavior. If you want people to be more generous, don't just tell them to be generous. Create a situation where fairness confers status. If you want to reduce prejudice, don't just preach tolerance. Create shared goals that turn them into us. We are incredibly sensitive to our environment. Change the environment, and you change the behavior. Finally, never underestimate the power of a single person or a single act to change the world. From Mohamed Bouazizi, the Tunisian fruit vendor whose self-immolation sparked the Arab Spring, to Hugh Thompson, the helicopter pilot who landed his aircraft between American soldiers and Vietnamese civilians at My Lai, history is full of moments where one person's choice changed everything. Our biology makes us who we are, but it does not have the final say. Behave is not an easy book. It's dense, sprawling, and challenges some of our most deeply held beliefs. But it is, without a doubt, one of the most important books of our time. It's a masterpiece of synthesis, weaving together a dozen different scientific fields into a single, coherent story of what it means to be human. That was a summary of Behave by Robert Sapolsky. We've explored the core ideas today, but a summary is like looking at a map of a beautiful country. It can show you the major cities and highways, but it can't convey the feeling of walking through an ancient forest or watching the sun set over the ocean. The real magic happens when you read the book yourself. This summary is a starting point, a way to decide if this journey is one you want to take. If anything we've talked about has sparked your curiosity or challenged your thinking, I urge you to grab a copy. Reading Behave isn't just about learning facts, it's an experience that will fundamentally change how you see yourself, other people, and the story of humanity. There's a link to the book in the description below. Also, if you found this journey valuable, Please take a moment to subscribe and share it with someone who might also appreciate it. We're building a community here dedicated to exploring the biggest ideas in the world, one book at a time. Let's keep growing and keep learning together.